Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Monday, November 11th, and we are here in week 3 of game music composition. You have now created and delivered all of the assets for both games, for both 2D platformer from our first week, and now Angry Bots from week 2. We're going to take some time in the first half of the class to do a bit of peer review on the submissions that we have from Angry Bots, and we will talk about what we're listening for and the overall intention and direction of the music, especially which helps now that you've completed your first pass of the composition and worked on the project. And then in the second half of the archive, we will get into the new topics for week 3, where we dive into using Wise to get your music and sound effects all set up and actually working in the game. So now, here in week 3, you will actually start hearing how the music and sound effects work in the game. You'll get everything working using Wise for both 2D platformer and Angry Bots. And more than likely, a lot of it is going to work well and function as intended, but it will reveal some changes that need to happen with your music, with your sound effects, in how, now that you actually hear it functioning in the game and hear it playing back, it will probably need a few tweaks and changes, which is the difference between your intention with the music and sound effects and what actually happens in the game. And do remember that you have the opportunity to change the music and sound effects, to change the WAV files all the way up until the final delivery at the end of the month. You have turned in the current version, and that is what we're listening to in week 1 and week 2. But even as you put all of your WAV files into Wise and you set everything up, you follow the assignment, you get your sound effects working, you get the music working, you play the game with all of your audio working in it, and you realize that you need to make some changes. All you need to do is you go back into your DAW, make the changes necessary, bounce the files out, and as long as they're named exactly the same, you have the same file name, the same format of the file, and you replace it. You just basically drag it back into the same location in Wise. Then Wise will say, hey, this audio file already exists. Do you want to replace it? And you will say yes, and it will exchange the WAV file or switch out the WAV file, but all of the work that you did after that, the mix and the routing and the faders and just how everything is working in the game, will stay the same. And so you're just changing the audio file. And so you have this opportunity to do that all the way through the rest of the month, as you realize any sort of tweaks that need to be made. So in the first half now, we will discuss the submissions that we have from week 2 with the Angry Bots, and then we'll switch it over and start getting into a discussion of how to install Wise, how to open up the software and get everything kind of up and running, and then how to get started on the assignments. So please, as you work through Wise this week, I certainly understand that this is most everybody's first real exposure, whether you might have installed it and checked it out previously, but for most people, for a lot of folks, it might be brand new. And so all of the material this week, the assignments and the videos and the PDFs and all of the documentation that goes along with it, will help you through step by step in getting everything set up with the software. But I would definitely suggest that you get started on all of the material as early as possible, so that you can run into any sort of technical issues if you're going to. Most people, a good 90-95% of the people that go through the class will have zero technical issue going through the assignments and using Wise, but for whatever reason, since it is a new piece of software for folks, just getting it installed and getting it up and running and making sure everything works with all of the technology Some people might run into some stumbling blocks, and we can troubleshoot around anything throughout the month. So it just requires you to run into those issues as early as possible if you are going to run into any issues. And then reach out to me and let me know if you're having some technical issues, and then we can resolve anything as we go. So that is my overview for week 3 of what's coming up. And let's go ahead and dive into our 2 submissions for Angry Bots. I'll start out with an overall discussion, and then we'll listen to these one at a time. So there is certainly a reason why this composition, Angry Bots, is the second one of the month. It is a bit more challenging than 2D platformer, a bit more of a musical puzzle overall to make sure all of the pieces fit together and make sense individually all the way up until the whole of when multiple pieces of music or multiple stems are playing together. And so with this new game, it requires a new approach to the music, certainly a new style and a new genre, new kind of production for this piece of music. This game and this composition is a vertical composition where you stack multiple instruments playing at the same time, and we make sure that everything starts at the same time and ends at the same time so that they can loop and play back together. As we can see with both of these submissions, everything looks like it is formatted correctly. You get this nice kind of block here, which means that as they play together, when they reach the end and loop back around, they'll stay in sync. And it assumes that everything is in the same tempo, the same time signature, the same key, for it to make sense as it progresses through the composition. Each one of our tracks here, so you can see which submission it is, and each kind of stack of tracks. And then with each individual track, we have our ambient, our buzzer, our mech, and our spider. And then we have our 3 stinger files over here. With the action cues against the ambient will always be playing and will always be there. It plays, actually all 4 of these play from the beginning of the game, except for only the ambient is heard. The fader rises up to unity, and then buzzer, mech, and spider action cues all start out at muted or negative infinity or whatever. It's all the way down. You actually have control over the final mix and the level of these faders in the game. Now, the game controls everything for you, but in Wise, there would be the same sort of idea of a series of faders, one for each track, and the game will introduce or fade in and fade out a piece of music as is needed as the battle starts and stops. And in Wise, you have control over how quickly it fades in, the level it fades to. Now, assuming the perfect mix, assuming that you bounced out all 4 of these as the final mix from Logic, or whatever your DAW is, you should be able to bring all 4 of these into Wise, flatten out, or just bring all 4 of the faders to Unity and recreate that perfect mix. If not, if you realize you need to tweak a little bit, well, the best thing is to go back to your DAW and rebounce things so that everything intentionally can just go to Unity, and it would make the best sense in your mix. Or in Wise, you can actually have it fade in, fade to a particular level, and then fade out in any sort of way you want, however quick. Whatever level that you want to stay at, and then however quickly you want to fade out for each one of these action cues. So that means the ambient cue will always be there, and the ambient cue will always be there, and then these action cues will come in and out of the mix as needed whenever the battle starts and whenever that robot is present in the game. And that also means if you have more than one of the robots on the screen, or more than one of a certain of different types of robots on the screen, then it will play multiple cues together, with the possibility of, at some point, it is kind of hard, but at some point you can get all 4 of the robots on the screen at the same time. I think you have to kind of make them chase you around a little bit, but it is possible, and it needs to be also possible in your music. So the challenge of this type of composition is the fact that compositionally, everything needs to be in the same key, the same tempo, the same time signature, which means they shouldn't clash. There should be no dissonance, no clashing rhythms, no clashing notes. So the hardest thing, the most challenging thing, is the composition itself, the notes. It doesn't matter the orchestration, the arrangement, doesn't matter what instruments play what notes. I mean, ultimately it does matter, but once you have the composition down, then you can start assigning different instruments or different voices to your different notes. That's the biggest and sort of largest initial hurdle. Then it's a little bit more about like painting with colors. Once you have chosen your instruments, then you can start applying them to the different action cues and ultimately the different robots. So each robot, each battle with the robot should represent the encounter. So the instrument that you choose, the instruments, the combination of them, should match whatever robot is coming to attack at that moment. And each cue, each wave file, or each robot or each battle should contain only the instrumentation that is unique to that cue. So you should not double up or repeat any instrumentation in multiple cues. Sometimes you'll hear the same kick drum or the same bass line or the same pattern or arpeggiated or like arpeggiated synth in multiple cues, and it will just double up and triple up. It'll just be louder in the mix. It won't change anything. So each cue needs to have only the instrumentation that is unique to that cue. And since it is an action cue, it needs to have intensity. It needs to represent the battle. So that typically comes from percussion, or most strongly comes from percussion. So with each one of the action cues, you should introduce percussion plus thematic instrumentation that represents that robot or that battle. So you have the formatting of everything, the fact that it starts at the same time, the ends at the same time, same key, same tempo, same time signature. You are focused on the composition, no clashing notes and clashing rhythms. Then your choice of instrumentation, which instruments represent the different parts of the game, the different battles, the different robots. And with those components, it is most of the puzzle pieces to fit together, which certainly becomes more complex overall. So you want to make sure on the instrumentation, when just one of the action cues is playing, when just the ambient is playing, or the ambient plus one of the action cues, you don't want it to be so sparse or lacking of instrumentation that it sounds empty with just a couple of instrument layers playing. On the other end of it, the spectrum, you don't want to have so many instruments in each one of them that when you stack 3 or 4 of them together, it starts sounding dense and complex. Now, that's typically not the fault of how many instruments you're playing. It's more of the composition. Having certain elements in certain ranges, whether it is a certain dynamic range. So consider low drums, bass instruments, synth basses, and then your harmonic instrumentation, and then your lead instrumentation. And then consider different rhythmic values. Having things sit on whole notes and half notes and quarter notes and eighth notes and 16th notes, where not every instrument needs to sit on the 16th note and constantly be moving, and you can leave space in different cues for different instrument layers to come in and out. So those, I guess the last thing would be the mix. We need to make sure that when we flatten all 4 of these out to unity, that it does not overload or just destroy, just go up into the red in the master output. Where the mix may sound fine in your DAW, like with all the MIDI production, and it's controlled by plugins and everything sounds great. But when you bounce out individual files, like all 4 of them sound fine, but when you start bouncing out all of the instrumentation that represents ambient and spider and spider and buzzer and mech, and then try to recombine them back together, it overloads the master. So watch out. Don't just trust what is inside of the DAW session. Double check the bounced files. Okay, that's a whole bunch of talking and lots of information. I guess the last thing would be the stingers. I'll say with these, they look like they're the right shape, where they hit in the front and fade out to silence relatively quickly. This one, I mean, it's kind of small there, but watch out for any silence in the front so they don't play offset from where it's intended. These look pretty good too, and it all depends on what they sound like, but they have the right shape where they hit and then fade out to silence. All right, so let's go ahead and start taking a listen to these. Let's see. Bring these down. And we'll start here with the ambient cue. So we have the bass line, we got the percussion kind of pattern, we got kicks, snare, hi-hats, and crash cymbal in the background. So I like the energy, I like the bass line, sort of 16th note pattern. And then, well, depends on where metronome is, but I like the groove of the bass line. I like the drums. The main thing with the drums, I'm a little hesitant to have kind of a full drum kit in the ambient cue, just to see where the drums go in the action cues. As long as the drums get bigger, then that will work overall. I do think that once those 2 instrument layers are established, now, I would bet that synth might be a couple of layers working together, but as we got the drums and that arpeggiated synth, once that's established, it's pretty consistent all the way throughout, so it'd have a couple of layers kind of fade their way in and out at different times, probably some pads, just something that's long and slow overall because this one's moving so fast. The other thing that I hear is where the pattern switches and changes in the bass versus the drums. Like, and it depends on, it sounds like the drums come in 4 bars, not 4 bars, like maybe a bar later, 4 count, 2, 3, 4, boom. Oh, then the drums have a little roll there. Because the bass, let's say the downbeat is where the drums are. So 1, 2, 3, no. Comes in a little up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like where the bass pattern sits versus the drums. Right there, it seems to kind of like their downbeat and the returning the phrase, the arpeggiated phrase, seems to be off from the drum pattern there. And I don't know how that is going to match up against like the chords in the rest of the cues. But I can't tell if the bass line is off or the drums are off. It really depends on where you want it to sit. All right, so let's go into the buzzer cue. All right, now having the same drum pattern in the ambient and the buzzer is going to make them double up because these two will play together. And I think the whole ambient sounds like it's in the buzzer cue also. So you're going to need to make sure, because this one's always going to be there, rely on the instrumentation in the ambient and create new stuff for the buzzer cue. So that would probably be a different pattern in the drums and just kind of move in a different direction with additional instrumentation. Like instead of relying a lot on the arpeggiated phrase. Like that guitar is in there, or whatever that, but just like distorted synth, whatever that is in there. Let's see, let's go to Spider. Alright, so the Spider seems... No, it's got that same pattern there, okay. But there is a lot of, or more, new instrumentation in the Spider cues, because you have that longer pad. You've got a different arpeggiated phrase on there. So I would lean in the different cues to lean towards different, like using arpeggiation in only one, kind of focus that in one of the cues and have another one be a little bit more open, and switch up the instrumentation a bit will help create more change. Alright, let's see how it loops. Alright, so that works. Except for the drum. Like you don't, if the drum goes all the way throughout the cue, you don't want it to stop and then have an intro, whatever that is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2. It's like on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2. Yeah, it's on the... feels off every single time it kind of loops around there. Let's go to the mech cue. Oh, I like the melodic line there. See, in this one, the focus goes a lot farther away from what we were hearing in the ambient cue. So this one sounds quite a bit different than just that. Although you can hear the similar parts do come up in volume when they're both playing together. So I think all of the ideas together work well. Yeah, you're going to need to watch out for the overall level there. Everything, once it combines together, just kind of doubles and triples up. So take the elements that are unique in the buzzer and the mech and the Spider and focus on those. You might even take that drum pattern out of the ambient cue and focus on adding a couple of other layers, and then leave the different grooves and patterns up for the action cues where that intensity comes in. Everything fits, everything loops together, everything's formatted correctly. The only thing would be that drum pattern coming in a little bit late against the rest of the progression. I'm just kind of stopping and starting over again. So it's better to have something that plays consistently throughout. Let's check out the 3 stingers. The main thing would be more reverb and capture the rest of the tail. Like a lot of this stuff could probably go on for a lot longer. Now the instructions say 1 to 3 seconds, and that is mainly for the core of the sound. I just didn't want anything to keep going on forever, or much longer than that. But you definitely capture the tail. So whether you fade it out or you just let the bounce go on for a little bit longer. That one's distorting. It's a little too strong. Now, with those two, I typically suggest having something in the lower frequency, a big hit and impact, which you definitely have there, and then something at a higher frequency, which the cymbal crash is, but I typically connect the kick drum and that cymbal crash together as like one kind of impact. So having something else in the top range or a higher frequency spectrum, part of the spectrum, to create a little bit more attention grabbing or capture in the ear overall. This one's kind of the same idea where it's most of the impact. So if you had a little bit of that kind of sparkle or whether it's filter sweep or delay or kind of effect on top, sometimes it can be done with some sort of synth, then it creates a layer that not only will kind of hit you and grab your attention that way, but also catch your ear. All right, so good work overall. A couple of tweaks recommended there, but yeah, if you let me know if you have any questions after checking that out. Just gonna make a little more room here. All right, let's go ahead and try the next one. We'll start with the ambient cue. All right, so we've got a interesting pad. I think almost like a vocal pad, and then a string or some other pad. Let me hear the attack. Yeah, it sounds like a ensemble, and then an interesting choir, and then a bit of almost sounds like kind of woodblock or tick-tock kind of percussion in the background. Which, let's see how it loops. Okay, watch that. Watch the loop there. It does kind of get cut off, and the thing is, the pads are all real slow to pick up and build. This would be a good candidate for taking all of the MIDI information, doubling it out, bouncing it twice as long, and chopping it in half, and only using the second half. That'll capture that kind of tail back to the top of the file and help it loop. So I'm going to guess that this kind of establishes the progression. You got a little bit of that percussion in there. Kind of foreshadows the pace. Again, I would like to hear something, the instrumentation kind of change a little bit at some point. This is kind of long and evolving, so it does take a bit of time to understand exactly what's happening, so that helps. But think about it in like the first third, the middle third, and the last third, or the first half and second half, and creating some other interesting tones that'll weave their way around. Let's go ahead and bring in the buzzer cue. Big kick drum, big bass drum. We got the white noise in there. All right, like different change to the percussion. Kind of a little melodic line. What is that? It's like there's some thin synth lines, so that works. There's Here, pizzicato strings. Okay, so we got some good layers in there. We got the big percussion and the rest of the drums that come in create still a lot of space. They're strong and definitely identifiable, got a strong groove to them, but still nicely spaced out to leave room for something else. Right, yeah, so things like are a little thinner melodically and rhythmically, and then it all kicks back in, right? Yeah, there. So we get into a stronger thematic line after that white noise sweep or that kind of reverse. Yeah, so I think there's some good changes throughout. That sort of, now, doesn't need to be this heavily melodic, but in the ambient cue, those sorts of identifiable changes. I don't know that it needs to be white noise sweeps and pizzicato strings. You definitely don't want to repeat it yourself. But having... Right, so it kind of, this is like what I would say a first third, middle third, last third kind of setup that I think could be addressed also in the ambient cue. All right, bring that back in. Let's do Spider. So just looking from the waveform, I'm going to guess this is pretty steady all the way throughout. Let's just kind of crank this up. So more strings. A light arpeggiated. We got the hi-hat in there, a light arpeggiated synth. I do think that it is just kind of too thin overall. Needs some stronger energy, and even just looking at the mech doesn't even seem to be as loud, or that, I mean, just that bass drum is very strong in the buzzer cue. So having the Spider and the mech compete with the buzzer all when it plays all together, we want to make sure there's enough intensity with each of them. Typically your mech is going to be your strongest one because it's the biggest robot, but you want to make sure they at least compete with each other. So this one, again, it needs that more density of instrumentation. If you do the first third, middle third, last third kind of thing, and have a little bit of percussion in there, something that holds the progression a little stronger, and then a melodic idea or thematic idea. Doesn't again, it doesn't, this melodic idea works well here, but to write three of those all kind of playing against each other could present issues depending on the chosen instrumentation and how they're playing against each other. So it needs to be somewhere between what the buzzer's doing and what the Spider is doing now. Just more instrumentation, more movement, yeah, more interest and stuff going on. Let's bring in the mech. Okay, so there's a change in the drums. So I think it does suffer a bit of the kind of the sameness, even though there is a change in the drums. It does. It has a bit of the sameness that the Spider has. I do like the intensity, and these probably will work well together. One issue in the mix. So overall, it looks like it could come up, but these two, the buzzer and especially the mech, there's so much low information, like low bass drums, big bass hits, big low rumbly basses. Mix-wise, that's going to eat up and occupy a lot of the space for your mix. So finding room for all that when these two are playing together and boosting up the levels and having these two cues compete against these two cues. You're going to need to do something in the Spider and the ambient that sticks out in a higher frequency range to compete against what's going on and create more kind of those identifiable changes. That strong melodic line is, even when all four of these are playing, you can still really identify it in the buzzer. So, again, formatting works, the progression works, the rhythm works. There's nothing that clashes. I do feel like it is a bit sparse, or kind of could have a little bit more stuff in a couple of the cues. Work on the movement and development over time, but you definitely have a good, strong foundation to work from. Make sure it all loops well. Some of the action cues, like some of that rhythmic stuff, help the feeling of a loop, but when they're playing by themselves, you can hear some of the kind of the ending over there. All right, good stuff. Is that right? No, that's not right. These are right. Much better. Okay, let's try 3 stingers. All right, so a good layer, but all 3 of them are just too bassy, or they're not too bassy, they just don't have enough of everything else. So again, that idea of kind of stacked frequency layers, where you have the low frequency layer, that hit or that impact, and then something in a higher register, higher frequency that sparkles and pulls your ear. Now, it doesn't have to be like cheesy sparkle, but something that is in a higher frequency that is going to catch your ear instead of just low end hit and impact. I even think that these are like the sub layer of something. Like this is the sub and the bass range for something that could still have a kick or a hit or an impact, and then also have whatever that higher frequency interest is on the top. So my concern would be that when you are, again, back to these cues, back to these cues that we said earlier had a whole bunch of low end and bass in them, and then you throw these on top of that, that it would clip or overload, but it's only because of the low end frequencies, and everything else wouldn't cut through. So just some things to consider in the mix, and how these are going to function together, because I think everything could really work. The aesthetic and the sound of the instrumentation and the instruments that you chose and all that stuff works really well for the aesthetic of the game, and I think it fits nicely. You're just going to want to make sure that you have all of the necessary pieces or layers to make sure it will work best for the game. All right, I think that is all of the elements that I wanted to discuss. If you have any questions or comments, please send me a message and let me know. Right now, I'm going to switch it over to the archive to discuss the new assignments for week 3, which will have a discussion of how to download Wise if you have not already. We are using a version of Wise 2019. It should not matter which version of 2019 you choose. I say that until one day in the future that they'll create some version that's not going to work, but that is not the case currently. However, the assignment does describe a particular version of Wise 2019 that the session was built with, so that you don't get any sort of message when it opens up. That's not particularly important, but can certainly help overall. But follow right along with those instructions as early as you can to get everything set up in Wise with your music and sound effects. Let me know if you have any issues. But other than that, I think I'll wrap it up there. And we'll meet again on Wednesday. Come armed with any questions, or if you want to send me a version of your game that you have up and working, if you want me to test it out or anything like that, we can do that, or answer any questions in Wise. We can do that also. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day. All right, let's go ahead and discuss your new assignments for week 3. Here in week 3, we will be discussing how you will be using a tool known as Audiokinetics Wise to set up your music and sound effects to get them working in the game. So we're going to start out by talking about how you can go ahead and download Wise and get that installed. And then we will switch over to talking about how we can set everything up to get started on the assignments. Now, when you go ahead and download the assignment, let me go to FSO here. So we are here in week 3. There is a Wise overview assignment here in week 3. This is a video that kind of describes and gives you an introduction into Wise. I highly suggest that you check out the video to get a feel of how just to kind of operate and navigate around inside of the software before you dive into the assignments. So you can download the video here or just watch it on FSO. Then we have the 2D platformer Wise setup and the Angry Bots Wise setup. And in each one of these assignments, there is a video that describes the full process of how you are going to set up using 2D platformer and Wise to get your music and sound effects working in the game. So I won't be describing the full process in the video today for the archive, but please make sure you're checking out all of the materials available to you on each one of the assignments. So we want to make sure we're installing and using the correct version of the software. So I'll take some time to make sure we talk about how to properly download the software. We will set up the files in a correct way to make sure that things are going to work properly for you. And then just make sure you download all of the materials for the assignment. We have the actual Wise session. We do not start from scratch. We don't start with a blank or brand new session in Wise. We do provide you with the session that has a few things set up to get you started. So please do not create a brand new one. Make sure you're downloading and using the Wise session that is provided. There is a copy of the video that's embedded in the page, so you can just download and watch it at your own on your own time. And then there is a workflow PDF, which is a series of slides on how you're going to get everything set up. So let's go ahead and talk about, well, we'll set up here things in just a sec. Also on FSO, we have Angry Bots Wise setup. So you're going to have a very similar setup for both 2D platformer and Angry Bots. We are going to talk about both of those. So make sure you are downloading all of the required materials for the assignment. So we will spend some time talking about both of those. Then there is also the chiptune composition this week. Week 3 is mainly focused on a discussion of technology. We talk about the setup and use of Wise and how game audio is set up in this sort of modern day. But to give you a sense of how far we've come, we do send you all the way back to the technology of the original Nintendo. So we do want to make sure you have a composition this week, something to work on for creating music, and it's not just all tech inside of Wise. So to show you how far the technology has come, we do a chiptune composition. And with this composition, you are mainly focused on utilizing the same restrictions from the original Nintendo. We provide you with sound banks filled with waveforms sampled from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. and we have you create a composition utilizing the same restrictions that was also available on the hardware. So we'll talk about what was possible, what was common, and after we talk about the Wwise setup, we will get into the discussion of the chiptune composition. Again, each week you have the optional feedback and peer review, which will this week for week 3 will be your chiptune composition. Virtual class link, the suggested reading and viewing. There's also a troubleshooting FAQ. If things are all, if you're having issues or challenges getting Wwise to work, there are a couple of common questions and answers in the troubleshooting FAQ, so make sure you also are checking that out. So let's go ahead and discuss how you will set things up and get started with Wwise and then 2D platformer. So let's talk about downloading the software. So you're going to go to audiokinetic.com, the makers of Wwise. And Wwise is a kind of an industry standard piece of software that is utilized to make all sorts of different games. It is one of the main tools to actually implement audio. The process of implementation is the process of getting your music and sound effects working in the game. The creation and composition of the music happens somewhere else, probably in your DAW. But once you bounce out all of those WAV files, how those WAV files are going to play back and operate in the game is kind of the domain of the audio middleware tools like Wwise. So once you go to audiokinetic.com, you're going to choose Get Wwise and download the Wwise software. That will have you download the Wwise launcher. You probably need to log in to download the launcher, but once you do, it will look something like this. All right, so once you download the Wwise launcher, you will go to the Wwise tab, and you will make sure that you can install the correct piece of software. Oh, nope. No Wwise. There it goes. All right, you'll go to the Wwise tab, and you'll make sure that you have the correct version of Wwise installed, which is the 2019.1.0.6947. There is already new versions of Wwise there will constantly be in the future new versions of Wwise that will be available. This is the version that was utilized to create all of our projects. Any version of 2019 will probably work just fine, but if you want to have no issues or errors or messages that pop up when you first load it up, then you can always utilize this version. Or if this version is not available, the closest one to it. So you will go down to install new version. You probably don't need the latest. You can go ahead and open up the latest menu here, and it will give you options to, let's see, will it react properly? Come on, Wwise Launcher. Launch me some Wwise. Latest. Wonder if this is going to extend to when I use Wwise. launch Wise here. There we go. You will choose all versions, and you will go to a version of 2019. Now, currently 2019.1.0.6947 is available. If it's not available, then you can just choose another version. I already have this installed, but when you go ahead and install the software, all these checkboxes will come up. Really, the only thing you need is this authoring tool. I have all of these things installed, so I can't uncheck them. But all you really need is the authoring tool. You can uncheck everything else. And even over here, if you can uncheck anything, just make sure it's selected to Mac OS, and you can hit next and have everything install. That will install Wise for you, and it will allow you to open up Wise. Now, let me get things set up here. Let me go ahead and have it launch Wise. Now, when you open up, well, I guess we don't need to launch Wise quite yet, because what we need to do is set a few things up on our desktop. Now, before you get into a session, before you load anything up, I would have you set a few things up on your desktop first. That way you have everything set up and ready to go, and then once we're ready for Wise, then we'll have all of our files available. So, a couple things we should do. We're going to start out by creating a new folder. We are going to title this folder 2D Platformer. There we go. Now, in this folder, we need to place a couple of things. So the first thing that we're going to do is, when we downloaded everything, we got a copy of a 2D Platformer zip file. And when we unzip that file, we get a folder that says 2D Platformer Wise that we're going to put into this folder. This is the Wise session that is provided to you that we need to make sure is going to be available. And this is the actual session that you are going to open up in Wise to work on this project. So we definitely need a copy of that. Then the other thing we need to do is have a copy of the game itself. So let's go back to FSO. Now, a copy of the game, you either have it on your hard drive, or you can go back to week 1 to get your copy of 2D Platformer. So if I'm going to go back on FSO, I go back to week 1, and I'm going to go to the 2D Platformer game composition, which has a copy of the game. Down here, I'm going to did I get that? There it goes. I'm going to download a copy of the game. Wait a second for that to download. The other things that we need, we took a copy, downloaded a copy of the workflow PDF. We want to make sure we have access to that so we can follow along with the slides. We are also going to get a copy of the game, which just downloaded here. All right, something else that helps. These two files need to be next to each other in order for this to work. If you do not have these two files next to each other, it will not function properly. It will add a weird kind of fake version of 2D Platformer with a kind of a circle with a line through it and an icon. You want to make sure it's directly located next to 2D platformer Wise, not inside of the file or not a copy or an alias or anything else, just the direct copy. Most issues with this project are not issues in Wise, they're issues in file management, and it's most commonly because this folder, Wise session folder, and this application are not next to each other. Something else that will make this process easier, we are going to create a folder called Media, and in that folder we're going to create two more folders, one called Sound Effects and one called Music. And I'm going to take a copy of all of my music files and all of my sound effects files and copy them in here. And this just gives me quick and easy access to all of my files. So I have all 9 of my 2D platformer music files, and I have access to all 18 of my 2D platformer sound effects. So I just have quick and easy access to all of the files. There we go. So, So I have a copy of 2D platformer. I have a copy of the Wise folder. I have a copy of the PDF and a media folder that has all of my music and sound effects in it. This should be the setup that you need to get started. That will kind of drop you directly into the 2D platformer Wise setup video that's available in the assignment. So I wanted to set that up with 2D platformer and discuss how that is set up to get you started. And we will do the same thing for AngryBots. So this structure will be very, very similar. Maybe a couple of extra things. Let's see. So I'm going to create another folder. This one's called AngryBots. And inside of AngryBot, well, I guess I should go on FSO and start downloading a copy of the game. Right here. So I need a copy of AngryBots. So I go back to week 2. And I can start downloading a copy of the game. So on this one, AngryBots, I need the Wise folder. So I have downloaded the AngryBots Wise session folder. I unzip that and drop that in there. What else did we download? The AngryBots Wise workflow PDF. And the AngryBots Wise asset list. We're going to need a folder called Media. Media. And in there, we're going to create one folder called Sound Effects and another folder called Music. And then I'm going to go get a copy of all of my music and sound effects, which I have conveniently placed all together, but you might take a moment to actually go find those. So I have a copy of all of my sound effects. I have a copy of all of my music for AngryBots. And I think my copy of the game downloaded. So I'll drop that in there. All right, so the setup is the same way. Your Wise folders are located here along right next to the game application. I guess one thing to point out, these are the project files that you open up inside of Wise. If you double click those, it will not load up properly inside of Wise. It will give you an error message. It'll say something like this. There is no Windows program configured to open this type of file. So you can't actually open it up inside of Finder or outside of Wise. You have to make sure that you open it up inside of Wise to launch those project files to make it work. Once you have everything set up, this will get you started. Then you can now launch your brand new version of Wise that you've downloaded and open up the project files to get started. Let's see here. Hold on, this is closing. Come on, Wise. So when you open Wise, it will allow you to choose the Wise project session that you need. So let's see if it will actually close down here. Hold on just a sec. Then once you have everything set up, it'll open up, look like this. You probably won't have all of these other files in here. These are all random ones that I have. But then you would choose Open Other. You do not want to create a new session. Then you would go to your desktop and go find 2D Platformer and 2D Platformer Wise and open up this 2D Platformer WProj. And that's basically where the videos start and will lead you through the process of getting everything up and running. So I wanted just to point that out to you to give you a good place to start on your way for these 2D Platformer assignments. Let's see, is there anything else? We talked about how to download it, installing the Wise launcher, installing Wise, and then setting everything up for your 2D Platformer and Angry Bots. Oh, that is a good point. Yes. Okay. In Angry Bots, we had a question. There was a sound effects file that the original files to use. Yes, in all of my sound effects. When you go to do all of the sound effects, let's do this. When you look at the asset list PDF, which is this one, there is a whole bunch of files in here that you will need. There's about a total of 60 some odd sound effects that you'll need for Angry Bots. You didn't have to create all of the sound effects for Angry Bots. You were provided with some of the sound effects. And to get access to the rest of the sound effects that you will need, you can find those in week 2 in Angry Bots sound design. So you've already seen this because you downloaded the file and worked on the sound design, but let me point this out again. There was an Angry Bots original sound effects file that you downloaded, and this contained some of the sound effects that you need. So when you download that folder, when you download this zip file, in it there are 2 folders, one that says to replace and one that says to use. You replaced all of the ones in this to replace folder. You recreated those. That was the Angry Bots sound design project that you worked on. The rest of the sound effects that you need are in this to use folder. Everything else that is listed for the Angry Bots project in Wise, when you're looking around and you're wondering where the rest of these files are, they are in original sound effects to use. Now, ultimately, what I did here was I just combined them all together into my media folder. So I took, get all these out of the way. I took all of my files, the ones that I created and the ones that were provided, and just dumped them in the sound effects folder. So you can combine them all together once you're working in Wise. But if you're going through and you're wondering where the rest of those files are, they are in the Week 2 sound design. All right. I think that is everything that I needed to discuss to get you started for Wise. That'll get you into the actual assignment videos and PDFs. The other assignment for week 3 is your chiptune composition. So let me talk about that. We'll download the materials for that assignment. Now, like I said, our main focus in week 3 is technology and a discussion of, a discussion of where the technology is for game audio in the modern day. But to get a sense of how far we've come, we want to give you the opportunity to compose utilizing the restrictions of the original Nintendo system. That music from that era is often known as chiptune music because it was all created on chips, certain kinds of chips. And so this assignment will have you creating a composition. Now, it is a linear composition. It does not need to loop. It does not need to be interactive. It does not split out into multiple files that play together in different combinations. This is just a traditional linear composition, but utilizing the sounds and the restrictions of the original Nintendo. So in this assignment, you are given an assignment PDF. The assignment PDF kind of goes over the assignment and delivery of everything. And I'll be describing this in a lot of detail. There's listening and reference tracks that you can check out. And you're just going to bounce out an MP3 at the end, zip it up and deliver along with a screenshot. But you get a copy of this logic session. And in the logic session, you are provided with 4 tracks, and each one of those 4 tracks has a EXS24 sampler on it, and that sampler has some sound banks that are available. So the main restrictions of the original Nintendo was you had 4 simultaneous voices. You had a 5th channel that was could be a sample channel, a 1-bit sample channel, but a vast majority of the music and sound effects were made with the 4 basic channels. Those were 2 square waves, which were typically your melody and harmony or melody counter melody, a triangle channel, and a noise channel, which was your bass and percussion. Then those 4 channels you can have, these 4 channels are represented with these 4 tracks. You can have as many tracks as you want. You can only have 4 simultaneous voices playing at any one time. Now, there are some restrictions that we don't follow the original Nintendo, namely all of the channels were monophonic. We don't really follow that. We allow chords, we allow polyphony. It's just 4 simultaneous sounds at any one time. And drums count as 1. We'll also kind of fudge on that one too, where like you can have a kick and snare and a hi-hat all hit at the same time if you need to. That would have just been 1 voice. Now, if you want to follow strictly, you can keep everything monophonic, but those are the main restrictions. So you were restricted to the number of simultaneous voices. The original Nintendo could only play 4 sounds simultaneously, but it could switch between those sounds very, very quickly. So you can have as many tracks as you want. You can just only play 4 voices at any one time. That's typically drums, bass, harmony, melody, or you could do drums, bass, melody, counter melody, or drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, some combination of those. You definitely need drums, and you definitely need a strong melody. that. And compositionally, don't think about it in a song structure or song form. Think about it more as describing the scene of what's going on in the game and the changes. Don't write in a verse, chorus, intro, outro kind of structure. Write more of what is it. First off, imagine a game. Often it helps a lot if you just sort of have a kind of game or a sound in mind that you're going for, just to kind of give you a foundation or something to base it off of. And then consider what does it sound like for the hero? What does it sound like for the enemies? What does action sound like, or adventure, or struggle, or winning, or losing, or just all of these different connotations around the game or contexts for the game. That will give you a better opportunity to write for something that will fit more in the context of a game, not as a song. So, each one of our tracks gives you a EXS24 sampler, and that EXS24 sampler has a chiptune folder. So if you go in there and open up where you can select the sounds and go to chiptune, you will find a selection of different types of sounds that are available. Some of these are some good long lists. These are very recognizable kind of sounds, and are all sampled from the original Nintendo or the Famicom system, which was the Japanese release. So a couple of things compositionally that will help. Some people either love this assignment because there's the nostalgia aspect to it. It gets rid of all of the kind of production around it and gets you to very simple sounds, and it really makes you focus on melody, harmony, and the compositional aspects of the sounds. The sounds are so basic, so simple, that you really shouldn't stick too long on a chord, like long block chords that just sit there, don't do anything, doesn't really work. Faster, more staccato kind of composition, lots of movement, parallel thirds and fifths and octave movements work pretty well. Putting an arpeggiator before these sounds and running them with chords or even just single lines, writing melodies off of arpeggiated lines that are sweeping chords up, even like 16, 32nd, 64 sweeps. You'll hear very signature kinds of, or typical types of sounds doing stuff like this. So faster, more staccato movement. Think about action. Think about what's happening in this game, or imagine a particular type of game that you're working towards. So when I'm describing having more than 4 tracks, you can have as many tracks as you want. You can just have 4 of them playing at any one time. And this is a very primitive example of this, but this is generally what I mean. We'll add a 5th track down here. So something like this, where you would do... Come on, Logic. Uh-oh. There we go. All right. So at any one time, there's only 4 playing. Oops. So you can switch and have this changing as often as possible, but just 4 at any one time. So let me take a moment here and play some examples. Let's get this set up. Let's try this. All right, so these are some good examples overall, but it gives a good indication of the different types of approaches here. Let's see if this works. All right, so this is a really good example of kind of storytelling through the game or through the music, where you have different kind of feelings and plot points. So this would be like the introduction of a character, and then they kind of set off for their adventure. And again, faster changes, lots of movement, faster tempo overall, works very well. Again, sweeping arpeggios sound nice. And it changes again. Different sounds are coming in and out. Here, it almost feels like it's an arpeggiated phrase as it moves around. All right, let's try another one here. This one. This is a good example of kind of that fast, really kind of staccato phrasing. Not when it starts out, but it'll eventually get there. About here is when it really switches over. And then we have one more example that probably, these are all really good examples. They don't all turn out like this, but this is the last one here is one that I really had to check to make sure that there was only ever 4 voices playing simultaneously. There was a lot of good production techniques in here. All right, so all of those really good examples overall. I did want to introduce the assignment. Let me kind of go back here. I think I went through everything. So we talked about how to set up a 2D platformer and Wise so that you can get started on your setup of your music and sound effects. We also discussed how you would set it up for Angry Bots, and then we went through a discussion of your chiptune assignment. So I think that is everything that we needed to discuss. If you have any questions, you can post them up in the chat. Stick around for a few after we finish up here if you do have any questions. But also, please reach out to me as you progress through Wise this week. Wise, of anything, you're already familiar with how to use DAWs and all your other software, but Wise is a new piece of software for you this month. So if you are having any issues, please reach out. We can troubleshoot any problems. We can fix anything. If you do reach out, please send me any screenshots or any issues, like error messages that might pop up. That always helps with troubleshooting. Other than that, we'll wrap it up there. Have a good rest of your day, and I will see you again next time. Thanks a lot.